The courtroom was silent. A single strike of the gavel echoed, not just through the chamber, but across the entire legal landscape of China. This moment marked the end of one trial and the beginning of a profound shift in how justice would be pursued. The trial of Jiang Wei, accused of stalking, forced a reckoning with a system that had long relied on whispers and shadows. The case was not about a dramatic confession, but about the anonymous tips that built the evidence against one man. For years, these tips were a vital tool for the fearful to speak without revealing their names. But in this trial, those voices were put under a microscope. The court asked, what if the chorus of accusers was, in fact, a solo performance? This single inquiry set a precedent that would ripple outwards, touching countless future cases. The story of this trial reveals how a mechanism designed to protect can also be manipulated. The judge's final ruling was not just a verdict for one man, it was a recalibration of the scales of justice. It declared that in the pursuit of truth, the source of information matters as much as the information itself. The decision would forever alter the path for those seeking safety in the anonymity of a tip line. Before this case, a flood of anonymous reports was seen as corroboration in itself. But the judge's decision introduced a new layer of skepticism, mandating that the justice system investigate the origins of claims. The burden of verification shifted from a simple count of reports to a complex analysis of their source. The gavel's echo was a warning. Digital tools can create both truth and illusion, demanding a more sophisticated approach from the courts. Anonymous tips have long been a cornerstone of community policing, especially where power imbalances are stark. For women facing stalking or abuse, the ability to report without revealing one's identity is a matter of survival. Anonymity offers a shield, allowing victims or bystanders to alert authorities without placing themselves in danger. This system is built on trust, that victims need a safe channel, and bystanders should be empowered to act without fear. In many communities, anonymous reporting is the only viable option. The anonymous tip line becomes a recourse, a place where a voice can be heard without a name attached. The psychological weight of stalking is immense, creating a world of constant fear. An anonymous reporting system counters this, providing a way for victims to fight back without exposing themselves. These systems were created to ensure seeking help doesn't require gambling with one's safety. Anonymous tips also help law enforcement identify patterns of predatory behavior that might otherwise go unnoticed. A dozen tips about the same individual can paint a chilling picture of a serial offender. But the system presupposes that these whispers come from many different mouths, a premise the Jiang Wei trial would challenge. The case began quietly, as many stalking cases do. Li Na accused Jiang Wei of a relentless campaign of harassment, unwanted messages, strange gifts, the feeling of being watched. Her initial reports to the police were met with a lack of concrete evidence. Her word against his. Then, anonymous tips began to flow, soon becoming a flood that created a narrative of a dangerous man. Over 2 years, dozens of anonymous reports were filed, each adding to the portrait of a methodical stalker. For investigators, this deluge of information seemed to corroborate Li Na's claims, transforming the case into a community-wide outcry. The prosecution's case was built on this foundation of anonymous corroboration. They argued the number and diversity of reports painted an undeniable picture of guilt. For Li Na, the tips were her salvation, validating her fear and amplifying her voice. The police and prosecutors saw the tips as a mandate to act decisively. But beneath this seemingly solid foundation, a critical vulnerability was about to be exposed. Jiang Wei's defense team faced an uphill battle, not just against one accuser, but a faceless crowd. Arguing against dozens of anonymous reports felt like fighting ghosts. The defense needed to challenge the very premise of the prosecution's case, the origin of the tips. Their bold strategy focused on the digital nature of the evidence. They filed a motion to access the metadata of every anonymous tip submitted electronically. The prosecution argued this would violate privacy and undermine the system. The debate became a turning point in the trial. The defense argued that the right to confront one's accuser included verifying that the accusers were truly independent. What if the tips were not from a crowd, but a single source? After heated arguments, the judge granted the motion with strict limitations. Identities protected, but technical data released. The integrity of the evidence was paramount. This ruling was a major victory for Zhang Wei's team, shifting the battleground to digital forensics. The unmasking of the chorus had begun. As the legal drama unfolded, a different narrative took shape outside the courthouse. With courtroom photography banned, sketch artists became the public's only window into the trial. Their drawings, broadcast and published, shaped public opinion. Early sketches depicted Li Na as vulnerable and Zhang Wei as menacing, reinforcing the prosecution's narrative. These images were not objective. They amplified the emotional dynamics of the courtroom. The public grew accustomed to seeing Zhang Wei as a villain. But as the defense introduced metadata evidence, the sketches shifted. Zhang Wei's lawyers were shown as sharp and focused. Zhang Wei's image softened. The artists responded to the changing tide, reflecting the growing complexity of the case. The sketches, once reinforcing guilt, now illustrated the doubt seeping into the courtroom. With the judge's approval, digital forensic experts began analyzing the metadata from every anonymous tip. They searched for patterns, digital fingerprints left by each submission. The findings were stunning. Over 90% of the tips originated from just 3 IP addresses. One was a public library near Li Na's workplace, another an internet cafe in her neighborhood, and the third the courthouse's public Wi-Fi. The tips were not from a diverse group, but from a handful of locations accessible to one person. Most tips were submitted using the same mobile browser and device model. Timestamps showed tips, supposedly from different witnesses, filed within minutes of each other from the same device. The digital evidence painted a clear picture. This was not a chorus of voices, but an echo chamber constructed by a single operator. When the defense presented these findings, the prosecution's case began to crumble. The mountain of evidence was revealed to be a mirage. The metadata could not prove who sent the tips, but it proved they were not independent. The case shifted from stalking to the integrity of evidence itself. The digital breadcrumbs led not to a community, but to a single motivated source. The metadata revelation placed the judge in a difficult position. The digital evidence dismantled the prosecution's argument, but did not prove Zhang Wei's innocence. The judge's ruling fundamentally changed the evidentiary value of anonymous tips, setting a new legal standard. Anonymous tips could no longer be treated as independent corroborating evidence. They could only serve as a catalyst for investigation. For a tip to be substantive evidence, law enforcement now had to independently verify its claims. The era of accepting a high volume of tips as proof was over. With the tips stripped of their power, the prosecution's case collapsed. The court was left with Li Na's word against Zhang Wei's, with little verifiable proof. Under the principle of innocent until proven guilty, Zhang Wei was acquitted. The verdict was not a declaration of innocence, but a finding that the state had failed to meet its burden of proof. The ruling sent shockwaves through China's legal system, forcing a system-wide reevaluation of investigative procedures. The acquittal of Zhang Wei was celebrated by some as a victory for due process, but for many women, it felt like a devastating blow. The ruling created a new barrier for victims of stalking and abuse, crimes that often lack hard evidence. The new standard for evidence threatened to silence victims already hesitant to come forward. If an anonymous tip now required independent verification, many victims might see no point in reporting. The fear was that stalkers would become emboldened, knowing that anonymous reports might not trigger a legal response. The justice system's mechanisms to prevent wrongful convictions can inadvertently make it harder to convict the guilty. Women's safety organizations acknowledged the importance of preventing manipulation, but worried the solution created a bigger problem. In the years following the trial, anonymous tips related to stalking and harassment declined. The case became a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of legal reform for the most vulnerable. The challenge of protecting victims without compromising legal standards remained unresolved. The legacy of the Jiang Wei trial is complex and deeply ambivalent. It forced a necessary conversation about the nature of evidence in the digital age. The judge's ruling reinforced that accusation, no matter how often repeated, is not proof. It upheld due process, but exposed the fragility of protections for victims. The solution cannot be to discard anonymous reporting systems. For many, they remain the only safe way to seek help. The path forward requires more sophisticated systems, reporting mechanisms that verify claims without compromising safety. This could mean confidential, not entirely anonymous, reporting or better forensic tools to distinguish genuine sources. Law enforcement must learn to build cases on subtle, patterned evidence, not just a volume of tips. The trial is a lesson in balancing protection for victims and due process for the accused. A system that fails at one will eventually fail at both. Justice must be both fair in process and effective in protection, a continuous process of refinement and adaptation.